Welcome back, everybody. From me, Tim Cable, to the Talking Sportsbook Show. Coming up today, we are going to be looking back at the rise of Manchester City with journalist Dom Farrell talking about his new book. It is called Glory Days for the Waifs and Strays, which it says is seeking the identity and meaning in the rise of the modern Manchester City. Now, just a quick reminder, you can catch up with all of the previous editions of the show and all of the video content on the website at www.talkingsportsbooks.com and on all of the streaming providers. And the video editions of the show are to be found on YouTube as well. Now then, if you are a boxing fan, don't forget to watch the most recent edition of the show if you missed it, featuring the award-winning author Don Stradley, as we talked about his new book, Immortals of American Boxing. There it is, Don Stradley and Immortals of American Boxing, and there is the book. Great coffee table book. It's got some fabulous boxing photography from over the last century. You can watch the video edition of that on YouTube and the website, or listen to the audio version on all of the streaming providers. Now, looking ahead to the next show, I'm going to be joined by Jonathan Wilson to talk about his latest release. It is called The Power and the Glory, a new history of the World Cup. Here is the book. Runs into 600 odd pages. It's a fabulous book, actually, going through every single World Cup. And I'm deep into this at the moment. And I am on the chapter that covers Brazil against Uruguay, that very, very famous final at the Maracanã Stadium. And I can assure you that this is not a book which just lists group tables results and has a few stats that you've already known chucked in. This will lift the lid on, quote, tales of scandal and skullduggery in the bidding processes and, of course, the political backdrops. Now, back to today. Let's go back to a time then where Joe Royle was the man charged with pulling Manchester City up by their bootstraps and getting them out of the third tier of English football and back into the Premier League. It's a far cry from the expectation and glamour of today's club. But as they'll tell you, for every Haaland or De Bruyne, there are legends past, like Paul Dickoff, who stand alongside the Champions League and Premier League winners and wear their achievements with pride. Dom Farrell's book, then, is Glory Days of the Waifs and Strays, and we met up recently to talk and relive memorable times, and it all begins back in 1999. Is this book then really not just a book about Manchester City, but the true definition of what a football fan is? You know, what the fan wants. We all want great players to watch. We all want to win games. We all want to win trophies. But here's the caveat. As much as those who don't have a club they support, which has a bottomless pit of money, and want one, so you can attract the best and win the best, there is a luster that wears off. And there's a line in the book, which we'll come to in a bit, but just to start, there is a line in the book where you talk about journalists wandering around the square where all the City fans were, and he's trying to get vox pops and clips, and he comes back to the production office and says, all they want to talk about is Grimsby away.
Well, that was in Madrid, Plaza Mayor, where all the fans go and hang out before a game at the Santiago Bernabeu. And the reporter in question was pretty frustrated about being regaled once again with tales of York and Grimsby and Wickham and the like. And I mean, I think it's important to point out, I had this pointed out by a couple of interviewees, that Division 2 season for City, you know, you can, banging on about it a lot, it can come across a little bit like sort of footballing poverty porn, because it was one season for City. You know, prior to that fall in the 90s, which is sort of when I first came on board as a boyhood fan, you know, City were one of the most successful teams in England, you know, historically. Obviously, there's a gradual unravelling under Peter Swales in the 80s and 90s, culminates in that one season in Division 2, which is chaotic and, you know, dreadful and amazing. But it is just one season. Having said all that, it serves well as a jumping off point for the book, because I think it does a fair amount to form and sort of set the identity of the City fan base, or certainly people who were around then and are around now, which is an awful lot, because I do believe that journey from lowest low to the highest high within a generation is unprecedented.
Yes.
It struck me in Istanbul, a lot of the fans who were out there, the vast majority who were out there, would have been at the Gillingham game, or remembered the Gillingham game, or if they were a bit too young, they'd have been bored to tears by people who were old enough to remember the Gillingham game.
But that's what part of it is about. That's what being a football fan is about. And you get that at any club. I mean, you know, I used to get it. I mean, at Ashton Gate at Bristol City, when they, you know, the Ashton Gate 8, and where were you? Where were you watching in 1982? You know, when they were playing a second replay against Aldershot on a Thursday night in the Cup, and there was 2,000 there. There are parallels to be drawn.
Yeah, there's I mean, the famous one that's sort of spoken of as City's nadir is when they lost away at York City in the middle of that Division 2 season, which left them at like their lowest point historically. I think they were 12th or 13th in the third tier. And I mean, you talk about famous Manchester events. That York away game now has become a little bit like the Sex Pistols at the Lesser Free Trade Hall. It's like everyone was there. You know, if you would take everyone at their word, City took about 40,000 to be present that day for a 2-1 defeat.
But that's where I want to start with that book. If you go back to what the state of the club was when Joe Royle came in the February of that season, 98-99. It was described, the club was described as football landfill, which was a great term, and underlined by the fact that they had 56 players on the books. I mean, it's quite incredible. You know, 56 players. I mean, we're talking about, you know, 3 first-team squads here.
Yeah, and bearing in mind that this is sort of before squad rotation was a vogue thing. You know, this is the late 1990s. This was, I mean, I think Paul Dickoff said they were spread across, I think, 3 dressing rooms in the at Platt Lane. There was kind of what was emerging as the first team squad under Joe Royle. All of the senior pros who kind of weren't in the plans, and then you'd have sort of young up and comers as well. So yeah, there was just a massive amount of footballers, and that was just a mismanagement thing of like the year before they had 5 managers, including caretakers. Alan Ball got City relegated and then resigned right at the start of the season. And then you had weird situations whereby you had caretaker managers who were there for longer than managers. I mean, Steve Coppell came and resigned after 32 days. His assistant was Phil Neal, who ended up being in charge longer than Coppell was. So yeah, and he was in charge. Yeah, so all of these people come along and they bring in some of their players, and then a new manager comes in with their ideas and they want more players. So it was Frank Clark that Joe Royle replaced, and yeah, there was just a massive amount of players. But even then, he brought in guys, I mean, who would end up being important in the Division 2 promotion bid. Around the old March deadline day, he brought in Sean Goater and Ian Bishop. So he was sort of throwing things on the landfill, as it were. But yeah, it was, and I talk about this in the book as well. If talking about fan identity, and you talked about Bristol City there. There'll be plenty of Bristol City memories that, as a two-team City, you will check yourself against what Rovers are doing. City checking themselves against Manchester United at that time. City's year in Division 2 was the year United did the treble under Alex Ferguson. So it was, it wasn't a flattering comparison. But again, these things that sort of really baked in elements of that gallows humour about City fans that is still weirdly there in a weathered way today, despite the fact that, to a large extent, to people outside of the City bubble, you can't really talk about failing to beat Northampton home and away with a straight face when you have the best manager in the world, the best goal scorer in the world, some of the best players the Premier League's ever seen, and all of that money. But that's the thing I sort of wanted to try and unpack in the book a little bit, that there's obvious top-line things about City that have changed beyond all recognition. But there are threads that go back to that past that remain. And the main one is the people.
It wasn't easy, though, either was it? I mean, they were talking about you had a great start against Blackpool that season, but Joe Royle was saying, we hit a wall because what happened in that division, away sides would bring more fans to Manchester for these games than they ever got for a home game. He's making a weekend of it, and it turned into a real struggle. And, getting used to life in that division was not easy. They would go to places like Macclesfield and Lincoln City, and everybody's expecting you to win 3, 4, and 5. And of course, it wasn't happening. And I do like as well, you come up with a song that was sung on the terraces, 1-0 in your cup final.
Because it was all things that City away was the cup final. And that's the interesting thing as well, because at that point, you come in towards the end of the life cycle of Main Road, which at that point, having been this famous ground from the Mercer and Allison days, it still to this day holds the record attendance for a club at their own ground in a domestic game, like from the 1930s, where everyone packed onto the kipbacks and stuff. But by the late 1990s, Main Road was the result of 4 separate redevelopment plans and had 4 sides of the ground that all didn't match one another, which had a charm to it. But certainly, if you're thinking at this point, you were looking at Main Road and comparing it, this was around the time things like the Stadium of Light and the Riverside Stadium.
Yeah, sure.
Teams were starting to move into modern stadia. And you had this mix and match, 3-tier, the old North Stand. Yeah. But the away teams who were coming there, teams like, and I'll run through teams that got results, like Northampton, like Wickham. It was the place to be. It was amazing for them.
Christmas was the turning point, wasn't it? Because they were 12th in the table at that point. And the match and the turning point, as depicted in the book, was half-time being 1-0 down against Stoke. And after that moment, after they were all fighting each other in the dressing rooms, they turned it around. There were only 2 losses in 22 and ended up in 3rd place and into the playoffs. Wigan, Springfield Park.
Which,
last game.
Talking of dilapidated grounds. And that was, so the interesting thing about that playoff campaign is this team that Royle had that early on in the season, who were expected to waltz to the league, clearly massively struggled with that pressure of expectation. They got themselves into a position around Christmas where they had those back-to-back wins. The Stoke game is the one everyone talks about, understandably, because the players were slinging right hooks at each other at half-time, which, is always a great story. But there was a game on Boxing Day at the racecourse ground at Wrexham, where they won 1-0, but they were battered and scraped a 1-0 away win on a filthy Boxing Day. A key bit of that game is Terry Cook was brilliant for Wrexham and was on loan from Manchester United at the time. His loan was coming up, then City swooped in and got him on another loan. It became a permanent. And he was a bit of a catalyst for that second half of the season. But once they get to the playoffs, they were back in that position at the start of the season again of City will waltz this. And it wasn't really a situation they dealt particularly well with because basically that team had needed to go more or less perfect through the second half of the season, and they did. And I don't know, I think there was a release, that run of 20-odd league games was over, and then having to go again. They had Ian Bishop had been really important for them in midfield, and he got injured the final game of the season, which was against York and was a 4-0 win, and York got relegated. But obviously that's not the York game anyone talks about. But yeah, Springfield Park, they ended up putting themselves behind within about 12 seconds because Gerard Vikens and Nicky Weaver, again, two of the outstanding, I think Vikens got City Player of the Season that year, and Weaver would go on to be the Wembley hero. They sort of left a throw in for one another, and Stuart Barlow tapped the ball into an empty net. That was, and yeah, that game was beamed back to Main Road on, well, I mean, in relative terms, a big screen, but for a screen in the middle of a football pitch, it wasn't particularly big. And that was, I mean, I think there were about 7,000 on the Kippax that day to watch this fairly large television in the middle of the pitch. Which, when you look again, that's another thing. If you look at the all bells and whistles, pre and post match entertainment around the Etihad Stadium nowadays, it's like it's come a long way. But yeah, this screen wasn't especially big. So when Wigan scored after 12 seconds, there were like blue blobs had put the ball in the goal. There were some people watching the beam back who thought City had scored, and I explained to them that actually they were behind. But Paul Dickov got an equaliser. But then the nerves never really shifted. The home game, the home semi-final against Wigan was like an absolutely claustrophobic affair, which they were very lucky to win 1-0. Sean Goater scored off his sort of shoulder, chest. Like the thing about Goater in those days, and some of the old players saying that first chapter, that it sort of went in off anything off him in those days. He was a proper bundling over the line striker, which then takes you to the playoff final against Gillingham, which is just a massive sliding doors moment in City history and therefore in modern football history in the UK, I think.
Yeah. They get there, and it's the first time since the infamous full Members' Cup. You're too young to remember that, aren't you?
I've heard the stories, yeah. 5-4 against Chelsea, I believe.
Yeah. But you got Gillingham and Tony Pulis, who's a bit of an up-and-coming coach. And I mean, he's straightforward. There's nothing fancy about the way his team's played. But again, I mean, you've got queues around, halfway around the ground, people desperate to get their hands on tickets for this playoff final and a chance for a trip to Wembley, and you're 2-0 down. You got families there, you got everybody turning up for what they think is the coronation. Yeah. And 2 goals 0 down, and there were plenty that left the stadium, weren't there?
Yeah, there were. I mean, I have outed myself in the book as one of those.
Yes. I thought I'd let you introduce that moment.
That's fine. But thankfully I'd not got far enough away not to get back in. No, that was, I mean, part of the reasoning for leaving. I was 12, coming up 13 at the time, with my mum and dad and my younger sister there as well. Now, before the game, my dad had, now bear in mind this is 1999, so we're thinking, about a decade on from 10-year banning orders from football stadiums, and all the things that had gone on in the 80s, sort of before I got taken along to football. But before the game, my dad had spotted a few of, shall we say, the old characters around the ground, and apparently it was in his head as, a father with two youngish children there, that at 2-0 down, in that things could get really quite hairy out of nowhere. So that was part of his thinking for leaving. But a lot of people left because it was kind of,
you were sat on the coach, weren't you?
I wasn't on I'd not made it to the coach. I was in the coach car park,
right?
Where we were meeting my auntie, who was reliably late to meet us. We were waiting for her, and you sort of heard the hubbub of when Kevin Horlock scored. I remember this fellow walking past going, and then being asked by someone, have they scored? Yeah, who scored? He goes, who cares? And that was it, you think. And again, there's parallels with the Aguero moment 13 years later, when Dzeko equalised against QPR. You sort of think, well, it just prolongs the torture to score. But then, obviously, what we didn't see outside the ground, in amongst all the hubbub of the goal, probably a bigger cheer than there was for the goal, is the board goes up for 5 minutes injury time, which again was quite a lot in those days. And obviously City proceeds to get the job done with the Dickov goal. And then it's like a mad rush to get back into the ground. I vividly remember, because they had like the gates open at Wembley, so we were just going funneling in through the gates. But there was one guy who looked like Fred Flintstone trying to get Wilma to let him back in on a locked turnstile, just banging his fists on it. And he's going, let me in. And there's people just going, mate, gates open. So everyone goes back in, and it's properly surreal. Injury time was a complete blur. I remember my dad sort of going, we shouldn't be here, like as if he'd committed, a grave act of treason on his football club. And it's like, would you be quiet? We're here now. We need to watch the game. But yeah, I mean, I think I know some people can get really militant about people leaving football grounds early. And to be fair, after that and the Aguero goal, I ultimately don't understand City fans leaving early, because I mean, you never know what might happen. But part of the logic there, and this makes no sense, like a lot of football fan logic. But I remember thinking that that playoff final was the weekend after Manchester United had their comeback against Bayern Munich and Camp Nou. And part of your thinking is, we're not going to do this because they did it, so we're definitely not going to do it. Obviously, what United do against Bayern Munich has no bearing whatsoever on what Joe Royle's City do against Tony Pulis' Gillingham. But that's part of the mental gymnastics. But yeah, they did do it. It's a course or a moment.
As time goes on and the collection of trophies gets greater, the more important the meaning of Gillingham 99 and Dickov becomes. That was a line from the book. So why is that more important now?
Well, I mean, first of all, this brings to mind when they had the trophy parade after City completed the treble with the win in Istanbul. There was like a panel on stage for the end of the bus parade at the bottom of Oxford Street near the Manchester Central Library. And the discussion was around, can you separate the three biggest goals of City, and what's your favourite? And the three were Rodri's winner in the Champions League final, Aguero's goal to win the league against QPR, and Dickov against Gillingham. And it's like, it's crazy that remains probably rightfully in that pantheon, with a goal that won a league title in improbable circumstances and a goal that won the actual Champions League. I mean, to be fair, Inter Milan were in the same blue and black stripes that Gillingham were wearing, so, but apart from that, there's no similarity. So I think there's a few reasons that importance goes on and on. I mean, I think if you were to look at it in pure sliding doors terms, City had already sort of arranged to move to what was then the City of Manchester Stadium, the Commonwealth Games Stadium. Those games were hosted in 2002. City then moved in after they'd converted it, dug down and built an extra tier of seating where there was an athletics track. They converted it for football in 03-04. If City had failed to get promoted that season, there is obviously all the financial strife that comes with a club of that size being at that tier of football. We've seen over the years how teams like Leeds and Sheffield Wednesday have kind of got stuck. So that was very possible. If that happens, the move to an all-singing, all-dancing, as it was then, 48,000-seater stadium is not viable. If they don't get the stadium move, they don't get the takeover. It was fairly well documented that Sheikh Mansour and the Abu Dhabi consortium were looking at clubs on that sort of city level, like Everton, Newcastle, things like this. The brand new stadium and the blank canvas of all that sort of disused former industrial East Manchester land around it was a huge big part of the appeal. So yeah, I think in simple terms, if you don't have the Dickov moment, you don't get the stadium, you don't get the takeover, and then you don't get everything else that's happened after that.
And he still gets almost hero worshipped if he's spotted, doesn't he? I mean, you mentioned again, go back to that time in Istanbul, Dickov is in there, and he's getting as much attention walking down the street as you were with Kevin De Bruyne.
Yeah, he's because obviously there are fans of my age and older who are going up to him, but there's people whose Like, there's 12-year-old kids going up to Paul Dickoff who, like, definitely don't remember. But they'll have been told about it. But all it is, and that's just the way the lore of football clubs go on, and you get told this collective story that's passed down. Yeah, I remember thinking, God, it's strange those kids having photos of Paul Dickoff. But then I think about when I went to Platt Lane as a kid to get autographs, and my dad got a photo of me with Colin Bell. Now, no one is saying, and Paul Dickoff would be the last person to claim this, that he's anywhere the standard of footballer that, pioneering box-to-box midfielder and England international Colin Bell was. But they are both part of important periods in that Manchester City story. So, yeah.
Being successful is great, but it's not what I'm there for. It's not what defines me as a fan. Again, these are some of the quotes that are dropped into the book that act as a sort of balancing mechanism and the trophy lift, and even more success. And then you'll see this. Yeah, well, okay, being successful is great, but it's not what defines me as a fan. Why is it important to make that point? Why is it important to make that clear? Yeah, really.
So I think so. And I remember the fan that said that to me. And this was in the context of a discussion about how City now compare to, say, your traditional English superpowers and like the other big clubs. Let's say it's the way that the conversation would go on around Liverpool, Manchester United, and Arsenal, for example, as the big, the big three historic clubs in the country. They are to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, certainly Liverpool and United, defined by the sheer volume of trophies. It's 20 league titles apiece. Those two have got 9 European Cups between them. That is so much part of what defines it. Whereas for a generation of City fans, it is more than that. It is, and at the same time, Liverpool fans, United fans are getting their sort of what they might call their banter era now, and they'll all chortle in years to come about when,
Spurs put 6 past them.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, but there's another part of the book where a City fan says he hopes United never get relegated because he wouldn't want to validate. He wants their lowest of the low to be becoming about 8th or 9th a couple of times, whereas City have this authentic misery. So that's a weird sort of inverted one-upmanship. But yeah, I think those clubs, understandably, if you start supporting that club, it is, we are, it's like the Liverpool it means more thing, the Man United hated, adored, never ignored. I think I've got that right. Whereas, City was like a sort of, people talk about Division 2 and people annoy reporters because they want to talk about slogging away against Grimsby Town. But I also think this is a really interesting period in history to speak to City fans and people at the club about this, because the way football is now, with all the wealth and how it is so stratified, is 20, 30, 40 years from now, certain investigations notwithstanding, but maybe even probably including those, you'd imagine City do just at some point become another super club. And that thread to the past, like, I'm not saying it breaks, but it becomes very thin, and the emotional connection to it will end. Like, for example, I'm aware that Bert Troutman fractured vertebrae in the FA Cup final and think that's a really cool, mad footballing story. I don't have like an emotional stirring when I see Bert Troutman holding his neck because I don't remember it. When I see the Dickoff goal, still usually makes the hairs on my neck stand up. So there will come a point where City fans are maybe just those defined by success supporters, like United, like Liverpool, like Chelsea. Chelsea's a bit different. But yeah, so I think people of my age, a little bit younger, a little bit older, are in this a bit of a privileged position that we've got to see both sides of it, and you're able to put the success in a wider context that other super clubs aren't able to, and that I think it's natural that will, with time, go away.
When you beat Blackburn Rovers 4-1 to go back to the Premier League, Was it your dad who said, "Look around you, this is the greatest thing this club has ever accomplished"?
Yeah,
Which is a strange one, because he must have been around for the times of the successes in the 70s and before. Obviously, not back to the title-winning team.
It's a strange one also, because he's not one for grandiose statements normally with that. But then, if he chooses to make one, you listen, and that's maybe why it's still in my head. I remember saying that when we were all on the pitch at Ewood Park afterwards. His reasoning being that, so he was brought up, on the Mercer and Allison teams, the first City teams he remember going to watch. And that's how City won the league under Joe Mercer only a couple of years after they'd been promoted up from Division 2. But again, because the game was a lot more equal then, it wasn't uncommon that a team would do that. I mean, the greatest example, I guess, are Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest in the 70s, getting promoted, winning the league, winning the European Cup, doing the lot. So if you had a great manager like Joe Mercer, a pioneering coach like Malcolm Allison, and you managed to get together a collection of players like Bell-Lee and Summerby, you're probably going to win some trophies. You're good enough to win trophies. So that was kind of expected. Expected maybe a bit strong, but it wasn't implausible. I think my dad's point about that Division 1 promotion back to the Premier League is that was basically a Division 2 team with Mark Kennedy bolted onto it. Playing really well on the wing, former Liverpool and Republic of Ireland player. On paper, that was a mid-table team. It was interesting they got promoted against they beat Blackburn that day, and that was a Blackburn team that had just got relegated, but still had so much Premier League talent in it, like Matt Jansen, who was a wonderful player at the time. Blackburn's goal that day. Yeah, Damien Duff, Jason McAteer, former City player Gary Flitcroft. On paper, man for man, it wasn't even close. I mean, and that's probably the reason why City did get battered for an hour that day and Blackburn at the post 4 times before the floodgates opened. But yeah, my dad's point there was they've achieved something they just weren't supposed to achieve. So you could using that. I mean, I would say achieving a treble with all the things you've got to get right is an incredible sporting achievement. But City were kind of supposed to be in the mix for all those trophies. That Division 1 promotion season in 2000 holds a special place for me because they really weren't supposed to do that. Whereas a team with a billionaire owner and Pep Guardiola in charge are supposed to be pretty good.
But has a team ever overachieved like Joe Royle's did? That was one of the questions posed. And it's funny, isn't it? Because when Royle had got that promotion and he was talking about being in the boardroom and they said, well, what do you think the potential is, and they did get that promotion. But do you think overall that it is a team that overachieved like no other?
Yeah, and I think unfortunately for that team, we saw that the year after when they were in the Premier League, and halfway through that season, they looked an awful lot like a Division 2 team that had been plonked into the Premier League. Because they tried to bolt on a few big-name signings that hadn't really worked. George Weah turned up and lasted about 5 minutes with Joe Royle because he couldn't get Dickoff out of the team, which I don't think George Weah saw in his immediate future when he was at AC Milan. In that season, there was back-to-back home games against Leeds and Charlton. They conceded 4 goals in both of them. And Royal had brought back some of the old guard. I vividly remember seeing Andy Morrison, all sort of bulky, lower league centre-half, trying his damnedest to chase after Robbie Keane and just thinking, this isn't for us, this. I think they're done here. So, yeah, I think that... It
started well, though, didn't it? Because the opening day, I'll remember seeing it on Match of the Day. It was, I remember it was the argument was about how do you pronounce his name, wasn't it? Was it Wanshop or Wanshape who scored a hat-trick on the opening day?
Yeah, that was the first home game because they managed to get hammered by Charlton again, 4-0 on the opening day. But then the first home game, that was one of those great nights, one of the last properly great Main Road nights actually. When you get, I love early season evening games when the teams are coming out and
it's light.
Yeah, the sunlight and the floodlights are having a little battle with each other in that twilight period. It just it looks great. It seems to make it sound different. It's a little bit more crackling. It's obviously it's anticipatory as well, because it's, no one is as browbeaten in August as they are in the middle of the season, are they? It's fun. It's great. And then Weyer and One Shot were brilliant up front that night. One Shot got a great hat trick. The other goal, I mean, if you're talking about threads from the old city to the new, the other goal was scored by Alf-Inge Haaland on his home debut, which, and again, that's a little thread. And the season after, he had there's a photograph everyone will have seen now of his, weirdly to see him so small, but his toddler Erling running around in an oversized City kit, and it won't have been the deciding factor, but the romance in you thinks that when Real Madrid and whoever else was trying to sign Haaland a few years ago, there's all the things that, he used to go and watch City games with his dad. He was in the City end at the 2014 League Cup final against Sunderland as a young teenager, sitting with his old man. So even Erling Haaland's one of those who got sort of thrown into that collective story very early on.
But Joe had to go. And Kevin Keegan breezes in, and reinvigorated the club. And again, one of the fans you talked to in the book saying, this was one of the best years of my life supporting City. When Keegan came in that first year, they had the victory over Manchester United in the derby, 3-1, first win since 89. But Goethe got his 100th goal, and he got them up to 9th place. I mean, it was a significant achievement for a faltering team.
Hugely, and that the Keegan promotion season was so much fun, because we talked about those Gillingham and Blackburn promotions that very much went to the wire. Keegan just put together this swashbuckling team where, I mean, it was a 3-5-2, but his wing backs were Sean Wright-Phillips and Danny Tiato. And in the midfield three, he had Ayo Berkovic and Ali Benarbia as like double playmakers. It was interesting when Guardiola arrived at City, and the initial thing was, can you play Kevin De Bruyne and David Silva in the middle together? Well, the answer is, of course you can. They're geniuses. But it did make me smile of thinking, I'm sure we had these conversations about 15 years ago. So can you play Berkovic and Benarbia? When they got to the Premier League, it became apparent you probably couldn't. And he tweaked it to be a little bit more pragmatic. I mean, more pragmatic in Kevin Keegan terms. It is all very relative. And it was a team playing that same shape that won that last derby at Main Road. As you say, first time in 13 years. First time in my City supporting lifetime I'd seen a win against United. Absolutely unbelievable. But the weird thing about Keegan then is they finished 9th, but you got the sense that the old guard that Keegan had inherited from Royle, whether it was Goat to scoring goals, whether it was Kevin Horlock doing a fine job as like a late career holding midfielder, he kind of wanted shiny new things, Keegan. And some of that was great. I mean, that they kind of broke the bank to bring in Nicolas Anelka, who was, at that time, by far and away, the most talented, gifted player I'd ever seen in a City shirt. But, like you say, they finished 9th, and he probably, I would say definitely, I don't think he gave that achievement the credit it should have had, and then he made a lot. The year after that was they moved to the new stadium, so he was keen on having a team with big names in, but you then ended up with this kind of thrown together, slightly over-the-hill all-star 11 with people like Paul Bosvelt, Michael Tarnat, Steve McManaman in. It was sort of like a 1999 dream team, but in 2003.
I loved Paul Bosvelt, by the way. I mean, what a soldier that bloke was. I mean, from his time I used to cover the Eredivisie for a good few years, and he was one of the players that you'd have in the trenches. I mean, what a perfect partner for him in the midfield would have been Nigel de Jong, who came a few years later. So. I mean, But
I mean, that would be the difference.
Not quite good enough, Bosvelt, for the Premier League.
No, and that would be the difference, that City got De Jong, and again, this is when you change a club's reality. City get De Jong when he's, I think, 23, when he comes from Hamburg. You say Bosvelt was a soldier. I think he'd maybe done one too many tours.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
It was there were some performances that were great. I mean, it was still clearly all in the muscle memory there for him. I mean, he scored in that incredible comeback from 3-0 down to win 4-3 at Tottenham in the Cup. I think also that season he came on at half-time in a Manchester derby and was really good in City winning 4-1.
But he would never dial it in. He would never dial it in.
I think that was thinking back to that derby, I think what was perfect for him is he only had 45 minutes. So he had 45 minutes to go absolutely pedal to the metal and just tackle everything that breathed. But yeah, it was a strange collection of players, and it's a collection of players that you think fondly about a lot of them individually.
Yeah. But
as a collective, it wasn't a collective. It didn't have what that Joe Royle band of brothers had. That then leads Keegan's desires to keep bringing in players leads to a schism in the boardroom, which leads to David Bernstein stepping down. I mean, that was a little bit before. That was around the time Robbie Fowler came in. Again, another player who used to be better before he signed for City. And so all of that Keegan transfer business, it not working, the boardroom disputes, and like the cost of everything piling up is probably what leads directly to a situation where you have a man on the run from his own government and Amnesty International with loads of frozen assets buying a Premier League football club. Well, you get the crazy Taxon and Sven year, which is,
But you've missed out Stuart Pearce here, because when Pearce came, the words used to describe his time were boring, fascinating, and then the just outrageously bizarre. I mean, he will be forever remembered, won't he, for that final day of the season against Middlesbrough, the fast with Nicky Weaver sat on the bench being told to go and warm up, and then David James is pushed up front to play as a forward with 10 minutes to go. And if City win, they go above Borough and into Europe.
But, and I will caveat this by saying I posited this suggestion to Nader Manua, who was on the pitch at that time, who at one point found himself standing behind two goalies, that there was a corner kick, David James obviously in the box as this doing his own interpretive dance take on a centre forward. But Nicky Weaver, as goalies do, had pushed up to the halfway line, and Nathan was a young, very quick defender then. He's thinking, what have I done to go from youth team striker to be standing behind two goalkeepers when we need a goal? But I put to Nathan that it was stupid, obviously, but it nearly worked. But he wouldn't give any credence to the plan being misunderstood genius. But the thing is, David James came on, caused absolute chaos. Middlesbrough gave a penalty away, which Robbie Fowler missed. And you would put your house, I mean, he was noted for investing in property himself, you'd put one of Robbie Fowler's houses on him scoring a penalty to get... If you had to pick a player in that City team that's like, right, gun to your head, you need one guy to score a penalty to get you into Europe, you'd pick Robbie Fowler, but it was a back pass. It's dreadful. Of course, the tragic figure in all of this is unused substitute John Macken, an actual by trade centre forward who is an unused sub, and David James is gallivanting around. I mentioned this in the book. There was a lovely thing that City's in-house TV team did, because obviously Ederson was noted as being wonderful with his feet and a great ball-playing goalkeeper, and also a bit mad. They showed him the footage of David James up front, and he was absolutely in stitches. Like, just thought it was the best thing he'd ever seen.
You needed an aura of calm after that, and you got it with Sven. Unlike Shinawatra, the billionaire former Thai Prime Minister who came in. Again, I mean, the whole money situation. Human Rights Watch called him a human rights abuser of the worst kind. I mean, you can criticize all you like, but the situation should have been that he should never have been allowed to take it over in the first place.
No, and you wonder, would a guy like Shinawatra be able to take over a Premier League football club today? And he might.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at, there's the very recent situation we have with Sheffield Wednesday and their owner not having enough money and nearly driving the club into the floor. Obviously, the thing with taxing is, when I was researching the book and I was looking at old BBC News website stories, and that version of the BBC website has like dated sidebar stuff, and you had this chronology of Shinawatra's assets frozen, Shinawatra flees from Thailand, Shinawatra has bid to buy Manchester City accepted. It's like, look, guys, this timeline doesn't look sustainable. Do you know what I mean? This doesn't look like a good idea. I mean, and so yeah, with Sven, it's a crazy double act insofar as you have the coolest, suavest man in the room.
Absolutely.
Basically walking aura. But then in the background, you've got like this authentic Bond villain character, and I say Bond villain. I don't want to cheapen the crimes that he was accused of that are genuinely, as Human Rights Watch says, of the worst kind. But it's, again, to throw to, I think Shinawatra is an interesting figure in City's current ownerships and fan attitudes towards it, and also general media, overall attitudes towards City's ownership when it first happened, is that was a year after Shinawatra. So you compare that whole circus to these guys who, they're wearing nice suits, they appear to be legitimate with their money, they are from a Middle East state which in relative terms of place in that region was one of the more liberal emirates you're looking at. And then you're comparing that to a fella who was on the hook for, allegedly disappearing and murdering a couple of thousand people in the narcotics trade. Mm-hmm. So Shinawatra kind of explains to me why there was probably not as much scrutiny as you would expect now, both inside and outside of the fan base, when the Abu Dhabi deal happens.
But with Sven's arrival, again, if you're a City fan, this is a great time, because this is a guy with a global knowledge of the game and a global knowledge of players. So you're getting in Ilano, Petrov, Rolando Bianchi, Giovanni, Chorluca, Gelson Fernandez is coming in. I mean, the excitement levels around the place, are stepping up, because the level of players that they're acquiring has gone up a level without a shadow of a doubt. You had a great start, remember, because he won 7 of the first 10 games and everybody loves him.
Won both Manchester derbies as well. So yeah, I mean, it was a massive step change, because one thing, and I think Stuart Pearce understandably sort of mentioned this afterwards, that he'd been on a shoestring, admittedly, after he spent the farm on Georgios Samaras, which was not the wisest move.
He was another Dutch great.
Yeah, but he was one. So Samaras, I think, was the very
from
first.
From the Eredivisie, rather.
He was. I think he's the first player I can think of who catfished the fan base on YouTube. You honestly, so YouTube was just starting up, and City fans here, they're signing this fella from the Eredivisie, and I swear to God, the YouTube clip made him look like Marco van Basten. It looks incredible. He had the lot, and he did. He had so much talent, but there were other things that quite drastically didn't work for him. But after the Samaras sort of misstep, Pearce was surviving on free transfers of like Danny Mills and Ben Thatcher, and then Sven comes in, and he's as much, not that I would for a second doubt Sven's global football knowledge, but I would wonder exactly how much he knew about Vedran Chorluka and Valery Bodjanov, because there was an element of they had this takeover and made the appointment quite late, so they sort of did this supermarket sweep of Europe. But yeah, and Alano was an absolutely wonderful player. Martin Petrov was incredible. And yeah, it had gone from a team under Pearce that literally didn't score a home league goal after January the 1st that season. Samaras scored a penalty against Everton on New Year's Day. They didn't score at home again in the league after that. They stayed up because the defence was good. It was
we said 7 of the first 10, but they only won 8 more for the entire season. But they did get that victory in the derby away, which was the first time, since 1974. I mean, that's an incredible length of time.
Since Dennis Law Backheel.
But then Sven is leaving. Yeah, so Shinawatara's trial. You then got the John Wardlow's got to step in and pay the wages. Again, you got more management upheaval. You got Mark Hughes coming in, and then you got the Abu Dhabi United Group acquiring the club. I mean, there is never a moment when there is not something going on. Players coming and going, managers coming and going, the board collapses, somebody on the board having to pay wages, the owner's gone.
Yeah, it was absurd. I mean, so in the book, I do sort of do my best from a first person point of view, documenting that deadline day, the takeover day, because I'd just started my first job at the Press Association, so I was working on their sport business desk, and we would handle things like football takeovers, because in those days, in 2008, a football takeover was seen as very much like a wonky sort of business thing rather than a huge, definite back page thing. And I remember leaving my house that morning, thoroughly disgruntled that City was selling Vedran Chorluka to Tottenham. And then I got home that night, and it felt like they'd sold Chorluka about 3 years ago. There's been this... The takeover news breaks, and then there's all these players they've been linked with. My boss at the time
was everybody, wasn't it? You listed in the book.
Yeah, my boss at the time got Suleiman Al Fahim, who was the initial frontman at City with the takeover, who then got quietly ushered aside, and then ended up making an absolute mess of things at Portsmouth. Yeah, he was on the phone just listing all these players we're going to go for, like David Villa, Thomas Muller, Ronaldo, Robinho, and that was Robinho then actually happened.
32.5 million. What do you think as a fan there? You've got a record transfer fee, Robinho right, for 32.5 million quid.
It's beyond the realms of any comprehension at that point, because they'd also been trying to pinch a £30 million Dimitar of Manchester United on the same day. So you mentioned that period of John Wardle coming in and sort of paying the wages, the former owner.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, Robinho signs 3 months after an 8-1 defeat at Middlesbrough brings down the curtain on Sven's reign. Middlesbrough pop up weirdly a lot in that period. And so you go from a summer of there is no money at the club, the owner is on the run, his assets are frozen, the former owner is paying the wages. A matter of weeks later, you signed Robinho for £32.5 million. There's no frame of reference for it.
And then you got Mark Hughes in charge. But the irony is they end the season in 10th place, 1 place and 5 points worse off than they were under Sven.
Yeah, but they were in the relegation zone at Christmas. It's another one of these songs that City fans have since appropriated for their own ends around the Premier League charges. But United fans were singing "City's going down with $1 billion in the bank" to the tune of "Yellow Submarine" at that time. It was a very uneven season because Hughes undoubtedly had Robinho foisted on him as the superstar, and then the first transfer window after the takeover in the January, Hughes brings in Nigel de Jong, Craig Bellamy, Shay Given, very much Mark Hughes guys.
Yeah.
And so you have this tension, and similarly, like in the summer afterwards, they sign loads of strikers. They signed Tevez as the big statement one at United's expense, and Emmanuel Adebayor. But they also signed Rocky Santa Cruz because he was great for Hughes at Blackburn. And there was a definite tension there between the coach Mark Hughes wanted to be and the team he wanted that to be, and what a new sort of raw but very rich ownership wanted to do. And there was a period that there was needed to smooth that off, and it probably didn't get properly tidied up.
You'd wake up in the summer as the season started, and you got a new player arriving on the Talents Play Colo Tour. Lescott was there, Barry's coming into the team as well. But you do move on in the book, and you have to talk about the human rights cases. You're talking about Abu Dhabi, which on the face of it is a progressive society. But then, as is said, scratch the surface, and it is not. We talk about the distance. We talk about Ahmed Mansour, jailed for 10 years in 2018, and then November 2023, Amnesty flying that plane over the ground with free Mansour. We have sportswashing, a term that had never been heard of a decade ago. Let's be honest. And sovereign nations trying to take over clubs, hoping that it raises the image of a nation. But the counterproductive aspect of this is that more people become aware of it and its issues.
Yeah, I mean, I know it was a thing that Newcastle United fans said around their takeover, of saying that, their Saudi takeover got an awful lot more scrutiny than the City one did. And I mean, my answer to that would be, yeah, because I mean, no one really, I don't think a lot of people, certainly in sports journalism, really had a handle on what they were dealing with then. I mean, if you look at the original coverage of City, it's very much couched in the idea of moneybags Manchester City. It's like, wow, like very much in the same way that Roman Abramovich was covered. No one was, and obviously Abramovich is a particular case because he's famously litigious, so no one could really talk about Putin links until, you can now, obviously, with what's happened. But no one was talking about that around Abramovich. It was like, wow, this guy's got all this money, how much can they spend? City were originally sort of viewed in those terms. But yeah, sports...
Well, people can look at it and say, well, what about the government then? We have trade deals and arms deals in particular with many of these nations. Remember the selfie with Cameron and Xi, the UK and China. But there is always a lingering question, and, you do try and tackle it in the book. Have City fans been too supportive of the ownership? Should they be less supportive of the ownership?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think the sad fact is that football fans in this country don't get to choose who owns their football clubs. If, to use the Newcastle example again, if Newcastle fans had a choice in the matter, Mike Ashley wouldn't have been there for 13 years. So you don't get to choose that. You do get to choose how you engage with your football club ownership. And I think there's, if I'm honest from my point of view, and I say this non-judgmentally because, again, to go back to the start of the conversation, this is just people going to sport their football. This is people doing a leisure pursuit they've done twice a week since 1999 or before. You can choose how you engage with it. So a banner hanging in the ground saying Manchester thanks you, Sheikh Mansour, doesn't sit well with me as someone from a Manchester family who are, I think it's safe to say left leading. You look at Manchester's progressive traditions, Peterloo, the suffragettes, sort of a banner kowtowing to a absolute monarch doesn't feel very Mancunian to me. I don't like that. I think Sheikh Mansour has an awful lot to thank Manchester City for, quite frankly, rather than the other way, as much as the other way around.
There are people, aren't there, who didn't particularly fall out of love with the club. And you see this not only at City, but elsewhere as well. But they've fallen out of love with the game because it's all about money. There's too much money in the game of football. The players are paid too much. It costs too much to watch it. There's just too much money.
The cost too much is a real fact. I mean, whenever anyone talks about players getting paid too much, and yeah, I'd agree. I mean, some of the sums are absolutely absurd. But at the same time, the game generates a lot of money, and that money's got to go somewhere. And I would certainly rather it line the pockets of players than executives or people organising things. But yeah, you're right. So there's maybe one of the most surprising chapters I did, because I wanted, because I was aware of anecdotal stories of people who drifted away from City, and I thought there would be examples of fans who went, right, I'm not having it with these owners. That's not for me. I'm done. It's not my club anymore. And no doubt there will. I don't claim this to be an exhaustive portrayal of every Manchester City fan, but there will be those people out there. But the people I spoke to who'd stepped away from it altogether, or the ties had very much loosened, it was, as you say, it was a drip thing. There was an old mate who I did used to travel to games with who kind of stopped going. And he's someone who was, say, left-leaning politically, was quite active in the Labour Party at a point. And we just all assumed it was a thoroughly political thing for him. But he spoke to me really frankly about how it was a general distaste for all things modern football. There'd been too much money in it. There'd been things just feeling awful. And he went to a point where he tried watching non-league for a bit, but he felt there was loads of awful stuff there as well. And he eventually just drifted away from the game. And I was surprised, because I kind of went into that interview thinking he was going to put forward the case of someone who had gone, Sheikh Mansour line in the sand type thing. But yeah, I'm not sure too many of those people will exist, because this is the thing, it's a point that starts the book of so much can get thrown onto and projected onto a football club. There is so much going on at Manchester City, and it depends which of it you choose to engage with. But to go back to the fan relationship with the ownership, you can't choose your own football club. You can choose how to engage with it. That's the reason why later on in the book I flag up some of the brilliant work done by the Manchester City Fan Supporting Food Banks appeal, who've gone, they're a bunch of mates who've gone to watch their local team for years. I would think politically they're probably not massively aligned with the Abu Dhabi government, but they know that their team now, as this global super club, has a bigger loudhailer than ever before. So they've used that platform really effectively with matchday collections and all sorts of other initiatives to help some of the most vulnerable people in Manchester. And that's what a football club's about. And they have then, that last season, they were, because they already had these networks and these communications out everywhere, they were at the forefront of protests against high ticket prices in the city, at season by season ticket increases. And there's loads more battles to be fought on ticketing policy, and the City fans are agitating against the club as we speak over various elements of it. But there was a price freeze this year. There was a reduction in match day tickets prices this year. That's all come about from collective action of the fan base, and how how a section of the fan base has engaged with the ownership. So, yeah, it's whether or not City fans do or don't, they oppose, they support, they are neutral on the owner. It's kind of irrelevant. If the owner wants to be there, they're going to be there. But getting those little wins that for the actual people who go to the ground, the people in your community, are massive wins. That's what you can do. And I think there was a definite period of subservience after the takeover, but that does seem to have changed a little bit.
I want to mention one more manager, because again, there were plenty of positive views and quotes about him over the years, and that was Roberto Mancini. And one of the quotes was, "I just love Mancini. He got the club. He understood the club. He understood what all the chaos was. He arrives, he succeeds, he goes." With the sacking revealed, was it the evening before the cup final against Wigan?
Oh, Mancini sacking, yeah, the evening before, yeah.
But what was your view of Mancini?
Well, so very personally, as someone who started watching Football Italia as a 8 or 9 year old, yeah. I adored Mancini in that Sampdoria team. So the fact that he brought Lombardo over as well was just amazing. I certainly in a work capacity, I've rarely felt starstruck, but in one of the first ever gigs I got going to cover a City thing was basically a City 11, sort of half a reserve team, played a pre-season friendly at Oldham, and Lombardo took the team, and I was like interviewing Lombardo after the game, and it's like, that's that guy off Football Italia. So yeah, Mancini, to say that he got it, obviously that's not to say for a second that Roberto Mancini was steeped in Manchester City history and that he would have been anywhere near the club without Abu Dhabi money. But you only get to be the insurgents once, and the character Mancini was as like the guy who moved away from home at 16 to go and try and make his way at, I think it was at Bologna.
Yeah,
then he's a teenager at Sampdoria having fights with Trevor Francis in training. He basically ends up running Sampdoria as a team that wins a Scudetto against the great powers in northern Italy at the time of Maradona's Napoli.
For the only time in history that they ever won it.
Yeah, and
then lost that European Cup final, didn't they, to Barcelona when Guardiola was playing.
And Cheeky Begiristain, of course, yeah. And then he has a limited international career because he's around at the same time as Roberto Baggio. Yeah. So he's definitely a well-balanced individual with a chip on both shoulders.
But was it your quote when you said that he was the most transformative club manager in the history of the Premier League?
That's not my quote. That's a fan quote.
Right.
I'd say it's probably Wenger in it. Or I think you can definitely make a case that it's Guardiola, but that conversation is probably for another time. But certainly in terms of changing the trajectory of City, and him just being not caring and thinking, we're going to go out and do this. And there was certainly when you look at a thing that had dogged City for a long time, understandably, was this sort of inferiority to United. The fact that he could go toe-to-toe with Alex Ferguson in a title race and win was just absolutely thrilling. Yeah.
And what did you think, lastly, of Capello when he came out? I think it was this year, wasn't it? Saying that, Guardiola has done such massive damage, enormous damage to football. Capello said, I kept saying to people, you don't have Guardiola's players. It's turned football into a ball fest. Why watch 90 minutes of passing sideways with no battles, no running? But people did pick all those bits out of that interview, but they didn't pick out the bit at the end, which is where he said, I do place, obviously, Guardiola alongside the absolute legends, Johan Cruyff and Arrigo Sacchi.
Yeah, I mean, he took a meandering route to that point. I mean, on the one hand, it's the comments of yesterday's man, unfortunately, but also, he is. I know what you mean when you say yesterday's man, but that's been slightly disingenuous because he is a legend. He did a very good job with Arrigo Sacchi's Milan team. No, I'm being harsh there. I like Capello, and I was a big advocate for when he was England manager, but then he kind of went mad at that World Cup at South Africa. But never mind. So I think they all went a bit crazy. That's another story, isn't it? I think Guardiola is the first to say in his press conferences that you can't, and this isn't necessarily talking about himself. Because obviously he's kind of probably asked about his ideas more than any other football manager, and understandably, because they've had such an influence. There aren't many people who've turned up in English football with several books dedicated to their managerial style. All that thing with Guardiola is all the information is there if you want to have a look at it. And he said that football can't be copy paste; it's got to be something you feel. So. Obviously, undoubtedly, there are. It might have reached its nadir with Russell Martin at Rangers. There are people who've taken the idea of what they believe the Guardiola philosophy is and done a very bad job with it.
I think, do you know what? I think the problem is it's nothing to do with it. It's when you look in the lower leagues and you go to watch a team in the Championship or the First Division, and you have this play out from the back obsession, and the possession game obsession. And I'll tell you, just down the road from me at Ashton Gate, Liam Manning suffered from it and he used to get terrible abuse. He got the club into the playoffs, but people hated it. Absolutely hated this thing of pass from left to right and to everything apart from get the ball in the penalty area.
Yeah, it's interesting because so Guardiola's. I touch on this in the book, and there's other people talk about it. Like he's got this idea of his legacy in English football, which and where that will sit. And it's
Well,
interesting
it will sit alongside the greatest that there ever were, for sure.
in terms of achievements. But I do think there was maybe and I'm assuming and speaking on his behalf here, but I think there was an element of he will have loved seeing. I mean, I can't speak for Liam Manning's experience, but like one viral
fans.
Yeah, one viral goal was when Rochdale scored like a 17-pass move, led by Brian Barry Murphy, who then ended up coaching City's reserves. He's now at Cardiff. And the thing is with the lower leagues, if you've got some, sort of hulking big centre half who passes it to the goalie who stands on it at Yeovil, it's great viral fodder. But there are also plenty of examples of teams who've started playing that expansive passing style who've got promotions, but that's not as funny, so you don't see as much of it. So I think, obviously, his influence all the way down the pyramid is massive, but I think one thing he doesn't reckon for, or maybe his advocates don't reckon for, is that baked-in British Englishness about our league, capital O, capital L. I mean, you look at the thirst with which the long throwing has been readopted this season, and to throw back to Fabio Capello, he might say about... it's past his side was 90 minutes. Do we want to see people taking a minute over throw-ins all the time, Fabio? I mean, I think what it comes down to is, and the reason football is the global game, is there are just so many ways to skin a cat. It is a game of contrast, and that's where you get the best moments. That's why the Klopp and Guardiola Liverpool City rivalry was unbelievable, because it was two people doing things at the top of their game in contrasting ways. Yeah, it's a game of contrast, and I guess if I was going to sum up the whole thing... So tell me, you don't get many more contrast than the last 24 years of Manchester City, I guess.
But tell me one last thing. Are you happy there? Are the fans happy being supporters of Manchester City now? Or, and we talked about when we began this pining for eras gone by and success not defining what a true supporter is, and there's more to football than winning a load of trophies. Are you bored by success? Do you want a period of underachievement so as you can just reignite again when the success comes back?
Well, I mean, obviously, I come at it slightly differently now because I make no bones about the fact I'm still a City fan, but it's also a job. I think the idea that City fans are bored of success is one of the biggest straw man misnomers you could ever have come up with. I mean, listen, they've won an awful lot, so. Like, it's not going to be every trophy is going to be treated the way that Newcastle winning the League Cup last year was, as a sort of huge outpouring. But then the other side of that is when City fans invade the pitch when they win the league, it's they're being a bit try-hard and stuff. So you can't win. The idea that City fans don't enjoy it is nonsense, because that's what it comes back to, is what unifies all football fans is you just want to see the team wearing your colour shirt kick the ball in the goal, and you want them to win the games. Forever. That's all you want every single week. So City fans get lots of that. There are wearying elements now, if whether it is everything is couched in the ongoing Premier League investigation, those things around alleged financial chicanery, that can become wearying. But there are loads of elements of modern football that are wearying. Losing 10 in a row in Division 1 would be wearying, But
your quote, and this is the last thing I'll say, is from that fan when it came up that the FFP could probably lead or potentially lead to be relegated to League 2. And the quote was, "Don't threaten us with a good time."
Yeah, that's the thing. And so
I love that.
There is a devil-may-care thing about City fans around that. Of like, and I guess that this brings us full circle to what you were saying about how success doesn't define a fan base. Like, and again, this is a generalisation, but if there was a case where Liverpool or United were threatened with relegation, it would be like, oh God, what are we going to do? Whereas if City were found guilty of the most serious charges and were given a huge points deduction that meant they got relegated, there's a frame of reference that City fans would be like, all right, come on, roll our sleeves up, let's go again. I think that they would approach it with amusing relish. So yeah, why not?
Well, that was Dom Farrell. The book is Glory Days for the Waifs and Strays. There you go. That is the book, the front cover of the book. And that is it for this edition of the show. Don't forget to join me next time. Jonathan Wilson will be with us on the next show. Don't forget you can catch up with all of the previous editions of the show on the website and all the streaming platforms and on YouTube as well. That is it, though, for now. Thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to having your company again very soon. For the moment, though, from me, Tim Cable, bye-bye for now.